All right, I think we'll get started. Thanks everyone for joining. Hello, I'm Louis Marvin, and I am a project coordinator with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I just have a couple of brief announcements before we get started with our actual presentation. So I think you all can see that this webinar is being recorded, and all of the sessions in this series are going to be recorded and made available on nsvrc.org. We do have a YouTube playlist that is probably the place to go for the quickest access to those recordings in between sessions. So I'll post that link in the chat a little bit later, but you can save that link, and I think it's in your confirmation emails from Zoom now too. So you'll be seeing that link a lot, and that's the quickest way to get those recordings. I addressed this last time, but oh, by the way, welcome to people who are joining us for the first time, and welcome back to everyone who's joining us for the second time. This is the second session in our series. But something that I addressed last time was that a lot of people have been asking if they have to attend each session. No, you do not have to attend each session. We'd love to see you every time, but you don't have to. And you'll be able to catch up if you miss one by viewing those recordings. And if you have a colleague who didn't sign up because they couldn't make the first one or two and they didn't know about this, you can let them know, send them the link. They can join the same way that you did. Something that I just want to address very quickly is that you probably all got an email from Zoom maybe a couple weeks ago that was saying something about the webinar being rescheduled. And I'm really sorry about that. It turns out that just the recurring event kind of restarted when I edited the description of the event, and I didn't mean to do that. So nothing changed. You're all here, so hopefully you know that the link is the same. We're still doing the exact same plan once a month from February through July. Now there's an August session in Zoom. That doesn't really exist, but I just wanted to explain that to you live so you weren't getting another additional confusing email from Zoom. So we're not having a session in August, and I apologize if that confused anyone. We do have closed captioning available today. You can turn that on in the Zoom captions setting. We're offering live ASL interpretation and live Spanish interpretation. So thanks to the team who is providing that level of access. You can contact me in the chat if you are having any kind of technical difficulties. Otherwise, we're asking today, our presenters are asking that you use the chat when they prompt you to respond to a question in the chat. If you have a question for our presenters, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll batch those and get to those at the end if they haven't already been addressed throughout. So again, please use the Q&A function for questions for our presenters, but use the chat to contact me or to respond to questions from our presenters. We are recording, and I think that's all from me. We're ready to go. We have our presenters from MenHealing and BARC who will introduce themselves and get us started. And so again, thank you for joining. Thanks, Jim, Sharon, and Kenton for being here and providing this presentation today. And I will pass it along to you to do a fuller introduction of yourselves and get us started.
Sure. Thank you. Jim, Sharon, shall I start and then we'll for our intros and then, okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Kenton Kirby, and I'm from MenHealing. I am based in Brooklyn, New York, and today we're going to be talking about reframing trauma. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jim Struve, and let Jim introduce himself.
Hello, good day for everyone who's here as well. My name is Jim Struve. I'm Executive Director of MenHealing and am a survivor myself. Sharon?
Thanks, Kenton and Jim. My name is Sharon. I use the pronoun she, her, hers. I am the Project Director of Clinical Training and Technical Assistance at the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center here in Boston. And I'm also a staff member of MenHealing. So back to you, Kenton.
All right. So today's topic is reframing trauma. So the goal is to understand the range of impacts of sexual assault on male survivors and reframe the paradigm for healing. Right. So this is going to be a lot about thinking that the way we've been looking at trauma, offering another reframing for us. So that's what our goal is here. Our objective is to really kind of think about two different lifelong impacts of sexual harm against male survivors, and also dive deep into how complex trauma impacts survivors who identify as men or male masculine identified. Let's see. Oops, no, sorry about that, Sharon. Not yet. But yeah, I wanted to also share that sexual violence is not done in a vacuum. It's not about the incident itself. It's about what contributes to the choice to commit sexual violence and what makes it difficult for men to understand themselves as victims and disclose. We're also going to talk about some of the myths and some of the facts about male survivors. And it's really mindful be our response as providers and advocates, how it has a ripple effect on someone's healing process. For example, men on average take 20 years to disclose and 30 years to talk about it, whatever happened to them. So I'm going to pass it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Ken. You can just click through the slides. So I noticed a lot of
Sure.
folks are already introducing themselves, which is amazing. I encourage you all to continue to do that. There are just a few things, if you'd like to share, to please do so in the chat, and that's your name, your pronoun, any identities you'd like to have acknowledged in this space, and anything else you would like to share about yourself or who you are or the roles that you have. I'm not going to go through and read all of them for you, but I would encourage you to take a look and see who's in community with all of us as we go through this training. I do want to give a brief overview. We currently have 110 participants from West Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Kentucky. We got a y'all from Texas as well, South Carolina, Maine, Iowa, Japan, and many others. So I just want to welcome everybody here and recognize how far-reaching trauma is and how important it is for us in various parts of the world to really understand sexual harm against men. Again, just to really acknowledge again that our identities really impact how we are seen, how we see others, and how others see us. And really focusing on the work that we're doing in this series is how the identity of being a man impacts someone's ability to be seen as a survivor, to disclose, and to receive services. So we'll, again, continue along that theme. Next slide, please.
All right.
So last session, we talked about the definition of sexual harm. What's great about the definition of sexual harm is it really focuses on the impacts of what was done versus actions and body parts and things like that. So we will fall back on the term sexual harm, and I'm going to give you again what that definition is. And we got it from a place called Safe to Talk in New Zealand. And it states, when someone has a sexual experience they don't want, or are forced into any kind of sexual act by another person, they've experienced sexual harm. Now on the screen right now, I've got two different definitions, one by the FBI or Federal Bureau of Investigations, and one from the Center of Disease Control or the CDC. Why we're doing this is if anyone was to Google the terms rape or sexual violence, these are the terms that might come up. Men survivors may or may not see themselves within this definition, which is why we choose to use the term sexual harm. But let's talk about why they may not fit. So looking at the Federal Bureau of Investigations definition, it says penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. This definition really is based on body parts and actions. It doesn't provide us with context. And it really focuses on, again, the actions between two people. It doesn't recognize, again, the context of rape culture in itself. And in 2013, the FBI took out gender from the definition. So men may not see themselves even in this definition. And I will also point out that force to penetrate, which is very often done if someone is a man and or has a penis, as we talked about last time, they may not see themselves in the definition of rape through the FBI. Moving into the definition for the CDC, they say any sexual act committed against someone without the person's freely given consent. So it is a more broad definition. And so I think it allows for more folks maybe to see themselves in it, but again, may not sort of give people the understanding as using the term sexual harm. I also just want to reiterate when we're talking about consent. Consent, I think, is a very clear thing. So I'm going to give you my interpretation of consent. It is that the ability to say yes and no are equally available without harm or consequence. If someone feels that there's a consequence to their identity, being told they're less of a man or their masculinity, they might not freely give consent, right? They might be saying yes or including themselves in the act because they feel as if they have to, because if not, they will be harmed. Again, if there's any harm or consequence, that is not consent. And I want to just remind people of that. And again, identities are very often used against folks who experience sexual harm. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about the current prevalence of sexual harm on men. I think last time I got on my high horse and my soapbox to talk about statistics. And here's why I'm going to reiterate that again and go through the statistics. So statistics require a couple of things to be accurate. As we know, sexual violence or sexual harm statistics are not actually accurate for many different reasons. I would say the top three are: number one, is the survivor has to recognize what was done to them as being sexual harm. And again, if they Google definitions and maybe get the FBI definition, they may not see themselves in that. Number two is they have to be asked. Again, many folks are not being asked about experiences of sexual violence, particularly if they don't quote unquote match what a survivor of sexual harm looks like. And number three, they have to feel safe enough to disclose, safe enough in who they are and their identities, safe enough to disclose to the person who's asking them. And many times this is not the case. So the statistics I'm going to give you are not necessarily accurate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the first statistic we're going to look at is nearly 1 in 4 men in the US experience some form of contact sexual violence in their lifetime. Even the words are confusing.
Yeah.
Again, the term sexual violence, people may not feel what was done to them was violence. They may not see themselves in this definition. So some of the statistics I've seen is 1 in 3. So just again, varying on the terms that they use or how people identify who's being asked, these statistics may or may not be accurate. Next one, please. About 1 in 3 men experience contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. And again, sexual harm is a component of domestic violence and intimate partner violence as well. The thing they're also focusing on here is contact sexual violence, which means there had to have been some contact between body parts and actions, right? Maybe not taking into account sexual harassment or non-contact sexual harm, which also impacts people and maybe not is being seen as much. So again, some survivors may not see themselves in these definitions. And the last statistic I'm going to go over with you is about 1 in 14 men in the US were made to penetrate during their lifetime. As I mentioned before, folks with penises or men may be forced to penetrate another person in the act of sexual harm. Again, that is not included in the definition, is not actually included in any definition. And yet we have a statistic here that says that men were made to penetrate during their lifetime, but it doesn't say that they then experienced sexual harm or identified it as its sexual harm. So just to tell you all of, oh, I'm sorry, yes. Just to again, let you understand the confusion that some of the men you might be working with will experience when there's all these definitions out there, all these terms and all these ideas. So what's really important is to teach the men that you're working with to use the term sexual harm and what that means, and to have a conversation about what that means for them. And so that we can all sort of be on the same page and understanding, and they're not feeling left out of the definitions as they Google them. So a part of this is to educate survivors, men survivors, on the term sexual harm, what that means and what it means for them. And so speaking of survivors, I'm going to pass it to Jim to bring some survivor voices into the space.
Thanks, Sharon. one of the big challenges that we face is that our social and our professional context still focus on girls and women as survivors of sexual harm. And largely, even with all the statistics that Sharon was just presenting, while the statistics are relatively equal for the prevalence of sexual harm for boys and men, we haven't got the framework to see that. So male survivors, men, boys who have been sexually harmed, really carry the experience of invisibility and isolation. So that's one of the challenges, and I hope most of you who are here at the seminars that we're doing can take away that that's one of our big challenges in our work, is to help to increase visibility. Let me read a quote from Ken Singer, is an early pioneer in helping to bring to our awareness about boys and men as victims of sexual harm. And in a book he wrote in 2010, let me just read this quote. It's very right on target. If 1 in 6 men had heart disease, colon cancer, or some other major illness, there would likely be a huge national movement to address the problem. Although the sexual abuse of males is significant and affects a large number of people, little is said about it, and there are no major public health education campaigns to help survivors and to inform the public about the problem. You can see at the slide that's at the very end, it has references to Ken's book, if you want to check into that some more. But that's part of our work, in addition to the direct service work we're doing with boys and men as we reach them, is to help spread public and professional awareness, get more training into our clinical programs, get more awareness into the waiting rooms of the places where people might show up. Next slide. And we want to emphasize a lot in the presentation today how important context is, because we can't address the realities of sexual harm just by focusing on the incident or incidents of harm that occur. What happens before any incidents, what happens after incidents, and what surrounds all the incidents is hugely important, not only to understanding the experience of being sexually harmed, but also what the difficulties might be of getting on a path for journey to healing. So context. And what we mean, we just want to give you some definitional framework for context. Context is basically the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular event or situation. It's the bubble that surrounds in which the incidents live. Context may be historical, it might be physical, it might be cultural, it might be political. It's multidimensional what might be context, and it won't be the same for each person, it won't be the same for everybody. Therefore, context may include beliefs about who gets abused and who abuses. It might be about the nuances of coercive relationship, what constitutes consent. And that's particularly problematic for boys and men because the penis is so external on the physical body, and whatever happens and is observed, that becomes very, very influential in terms of how the survivor themselves experience what happened and what the offender may do for manipulating the experience for the victim. The victim's emotional attachment to the perpetrator, most of us probably here know already that the cultural norm is that sexual harm happens from strangers. The truth is most victims know their offender. There is some prior relationship most of the time. And then context also involves the power dynamics and the emotional factors. There is so often we focus on the physical harm that happens and we forget about the psychological and emotional dimensions that might be huge, especially for the healing process. Next slide. And many survivors and psychotherapists, providers, helpers focus on the sexual aspects of the abuse and fail to acknowledge the importance of the context in which abuse takes place. So it's really, really important that we engage in conversation. Sometimes this just doesn't happen from the intake forms of the questions we have. We have to find the narrative which comes from conversation, comes from the relationship that we develop with a victim or survivor, to understand what else was going on that surrounds the incidents that we might be addressing. And therefore, it's important that we realize nothing happens in a vacuum. It's important to realize that there is usually some aspect to be exposed that gives lots of information, both about what the experience was, how it happened, and what someone is carrying forward in the healing journey. Kenton, I'll pass it on to you.
All right. See if, all right. All right. So yeah, so thanks, Jim. Thanks, Sharon, for framing this. But so I want to talk a little bit about some of the common reactions to sexual harm done to boys. So obviously there's a lot of shame and guilt, and that shame and guilt can also be, we can see it as service providers as anger, right? Especially when you think of heteronormative male socialization under the guise of white supremacy. That's, we are in this position of anger is the forefront emotion that we see, but it's expressing other complex emotions that many of our male survivors may actually not have as much access to. So yeah, fear is another one, right? And that can look in different ways. Fear of closeness with other men or masculine identified individuals. That sadness, that isolation and feeling invisible, right? That Jim was mentioning earlier. Confusion about what did I do for this to happen? It must have been my fault, or like, what was my deficit, right? And disbelief. How could this happen to me? I'm a 6'4" man, and I was a victim of sex assault. How is that possible? And also another thing is over or under functioning, right? Someone who may just be they are reacting by being super busy, like keeping themselves completely active, which is a way to kind of distance myself from that harm. But I can still do what I'm doing here. It's not getting in my way. And a fear of closeness, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, sometimes you slide stick, Jim. Let's see. Come on, next slide. There we go. More common reactions. So, like I mentioned, isolation and visibility, feeling like you're the only one this was done to. Like this was, I can't believe that there's other folks that would actually have an experience like this, like me. I think the only one this was done to, as I mentioned, there's a belief that something is wrong with me. Why me? This is a common one, minimization of it, minimization of the event. I asked for it. It wasn't that bad. I can sack up. I can get through this. And I would even say the emasculation or exaggeration of masculinity, kind of doubling down on this heteronormative framework of masculinity. So the acting out, the aggression, the all of those things that a lot of times, sometimes can be misinterpreted as, oh, this is how we are culturally, when in fact, it could actually be a trauma reaction, and open up that possibility for it. And Candace, what? I tell y'all, my computer's sticking. More common reactions, some of the ones that we are aware of, the addictions, body issues, some self-destructive behaviors, and we can think of others, right? I mean, I would say anything beyond that goes beyond someone's baseline can be reactions to any sort of harm. And I would say for this context, we're talking about sexual harm. I see the self-destructive behaviors, folks that are perhaps maybe even you doing more risky behavior because of their harm. And some one-liners that folks, male survivors have possibly said, other survivors have said, I must have wanted it. What sign did I give off? I'm a man, I should have protected myself. And also, why did I not make it stop? And then also, like I mentioned earlier, it's no big deal, just need to suck it up. And the one that I've always heard was man up, which is very loaded and says a lot to me when I hear the term man up as a reaction. And these identity questions that emerge for us, for boys and men who are survivors of sexual harm. What is it to be a victim? Victimhood. Am I really a victim? There were moments, I remember hearing this language in maybe like 8, 9, 10 years ago, talking about deserving survivors, deserving victims, which then kind of says someone's survivorship is hierarchical. How can I be a victim if I'm this traditional heteronormative version of masculinity? Does it make me question my sexual orientation, others' reactions or my own reaction, and also even my own self-worth is things that could be questioned for survivors. So I'm pass it back over to you, Jim, right?
It's me.
Oh, Sharon, sorry, Sharon.
It's okay, no problem.
Uh,
Reframing is one of my favorite clinical tools because I use it not only with clinicians, but my family and friends as well. It's a really great tool to show people that you're listening and to validate. And I do get really excited. So I'm going to try to like slow down. I tend to talk really fast and been drinking coffee and I'm trying not to drink too much. But I want to talk a little bit about reframing. And I know that this is, something that all of you have used, whether you realize it or not, and have named it reframing. But what it is, it's changing perspective. It's changing how you understand something or how you've been conditioned or taught to understand something. And it changes based on the information you have and the experiences that you have. Everyone's perspective is their own perspective. You probably have all used reframing. So we talk about what's the common reaction to trauma. The reframe is anything. You probably have told survivors you did in the moment what was best for you. You made the decision based on the information that you have. One I commonly use is you did everything you could in the moment to survive. And so I think it's just really recognizing that we use this all the time. I am going to do an activity that I do with my clients with you using the term broken to help understand the power of perspective and what it can look like. I do want folks to know that I'm currently working with the Spanish-speaking clinicians here at BARC to come up with a Spanish word or phrase equivalent to this exercise. And so I wanted to acknowledge that in this space, but I think it's helpful to at least give you the exercise so you understand the power of reframing and perspective changing and how important that is for men survivors. So in the chat right now, I'm going to put the word broken. I type really slowly. I talk a lot faster than I type. The word broken. All I want everyone to do is just take a moment and notice the word broken. It is, you can spell it to yourself in your head. You can take a look at the screen. It's a word that we're all very familiar with. We've used it, we've spelled it, we've seen it, we've heard it. It's something that's been in our lives for a long time. And by definition, broken means to be fractured or damaged. So very often survivors of sexual violence or sexual harm, will refer to themselves as broken. And I like to do this exercise to reframe what that could be for them. So what I'd like everyone to do is to bring your attention to the middle of the word broken and tell me what you see as I spell it out loud. B-R-O-K-E-N. Right. Okay is in the middle of the word broken. Many of us have never seen that. I do make a joke that this is a great party trick, but it's just shown how often we are taught to look at something as a whole, but not to see the individual pieces or individual parts, right? That equity lens we talked about last time. So in the middle of the word broken is the word okay. Now imagine if we could reframe for survivors that they can be broken and okay, that they could be a man and a survivor. And so even changing this perspective of the word broken, perspective of maybe themselves, is really a helpful tool and exercise to help people understand what counseling can look like, but also to what reframing is. So I want us to think about not only using these for our clients, but for ourselves as well. The next reframe I want us to think about is using the word and versus but. Very often we use the word but, we say a whole bunch of things that are really positive, and then we say but, and then a whole bunch of negative follows and cancels out the beginning. It's important to understand that all things are true, And if we use the word and, we can recognize and give space for all the truths. What's also really important about using the word and is it doesn't make us have to make a choice about what we're going to talk about or what we're going to feel, because all feelings are valid. So using the word and as I said before, you can be a man and a survivor. So using the word and I would encourage all of you to take the word but out of your vocabulary and insert the word and. Next one, please, Kenton. Very often we use the words should, supposed to, and have to. And I very often wonder is who decided all of these things? Should, supposed to, and have to is based on someone else's perspective. We are trying to help survivors understand their own perspectives or develop their own perspectives of their experiences. I don't know about you, but as soon as I hear the word should or supposed to, this wall comes up and I start to get a little heated because I don't want to be told what to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to talk about what do you want and what do you need? And that's more based on their individual experiences. And again, those things might shift moment to moment, but it's based on their experiences and the information and perspective they hold. Next one, Ken.
All right.
So I don't know if you've heard us talk about sexual harm is done. I don't know if you hear how different it is. When we talk about the idea of happening, it almost seems like it's an accident, like a natural disaster. It's not. Sexual violence is done. What that means is someone has made a choice to cause harm to someone else. And it is very important for us to begin to reframe that the accountability of sexual violence is on the perpetrator. Because we know, as Kenton talked about before, that shame and guilt very often comes from self-blame and the conditioning that we have to put the blame on the survivors. If we start to use the language of sexual harm is done, it'll change our perspective of the survivors. And again, teaching survivors to use this will also change the perspective of their experience. Next one, please. Kenton, you're going over some of the messages that men tell themselves when they've experienced sexual harm. And one of them was, I believe that there's something wrong with me. We very often go there and ask what's wrong with somebody. And that is very pathologizing. It is making a lot of assumption. It's making a lot of judgment. And as we know on the statistics, many folks have experienced sexual harm. So we need to, again, change our perspective and reframe how we ask survivors about their experiences. So asking them what happened to you or what was done to you versus what is wrong with you, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're just responding to their experiences. So really reframing, again, what happened to you or what was done to you. Next one, please. We are going to have a whole session on safety, and we understand that safety may not even be the thing, but for our purposes today, it's thinking about using the tools of safer or safe enough and why that's important. Safety is not an end-all be-all. Some people may have never experienced safety or even know what that is. And it's really important to understand that it's on a continuum, that we talk about safer, it's on a continuum. It's not the complete safety. It's not being safe at all. There's something in the middle. So being able to talk about safer or safe enough and being able to develop that rapport with your client so it gives them the space to really talk about what was done to them. Next. As I said, a lot of folks aren't asked about sexual violence, and that may come down to people's assumptions around gender and gender identity. So we always want to practice gender inclusivity in our information gathering. You really need to be asking, I didn't say should, supposed to, or have to. You need to be asking everyone the same questions, particularly when it comes to sexual harm, is making sure you're asking everybody. Yeah. I think sometimes we don't ask the people we don't assume are survivors because we become very uncomfortable in our response or how to respond or what to do in those moments. And so we're hoping that through the sessions is that we reduce any anxiety or worry that you have in responding to men who've experienced sexual violence. Next one, please.
Okay, give me a second. It's
sticking again.
It's sticking.
You got to stop
again.
eating all those lollipops. I know you love those lollipops. It gets the keys all sticky. Nothing wrong with that, though. And so it really is understanding, again, that sexual harm or sexual trauma really impacts everyone's whole life, right? Their physical health, their mental health, their emotions, their behaviors, how they are in their body. And it's really important to incorporate all of those things in the work that we're doing. As we talk about trauma, it brings up Judith Herman, as we call her Mama Trauma. And she talks about trauma being a disease of disconnection. And so one of the antidotes or one of the reframes is connection. And I know all of us here, Kent and Jim and I really believe that there's so much power in the therapeutic relationship. So relationship between the victim or survivor with the provider are helpful. And how crucial it is and how reparative it can actually be. And so thinking about that relationship as being really reparative or reframing their understanding and experiences of previous relationships. As we talked before about some of the impacts, we want to think about some of the things that men may show us that they have experienced trauma, some things that might be uncomfortable for us as providers, but we need to reframe the understanding of where they're coming from and really recognize that anger does not equal violence. And that anger is an emotion that is real and true and needs its space. So I want to consider that hypermasculine, aggressive, violent behaviors are sometimes symptoms of unresolved or dissociated trauma. And again, getting back to that idea of what was done to you or what happened to you versus what's wrong with you. And really understanding these symptoms and these aggressions come from somewhere and really getting to what's behind that so that we can reframe the person's experience and understanding of what anger is. And again, anger is not violence. So I'm going to pass it off to Jim, who's going to talk a lot more about reframing trauma. So Jim, it's all yours.
Good, thanks. I'm not going to talk, I'm going to set up us to be able to watch a video together. But let me, just the context here about this. We started doing 3-day weekends recovery in 2001 to bring together adult males for a shared experience of healing from their sexual harm. And by 2018, we reformulated as MenHealing. And one of the changes that we made at that time was we realized that statistics and cognitive information was not reaching boys and men as powerfully as we felt needed to be there. So we really began to undertake the process of more storytelling, helping find forms and opportunities for people to tell the stories of what had happened to them. Another historical context that kind of intersects here, you may realize that it was out of the military and war that we came up with shell shock. And shell shock as a diagnostic category became post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was into the DSM, the diagnostic manual. In 2011, the Peter Chiarelli, the US Army Lieutenant General, he was the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time. He took the banner and began to advocate with the publishers of the DSM. Perhaps we should do a change from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic stress injury. That really resonates with us. And so what we decided to do in 2019 was begin to carry that reframe forward as a new paradigm for working with boys and men. And to make it into a story, we contacted an animation company and we worked out for several months to make an animated video about the reframe from post-traumatic stress disorder to post-traumatic stress injury. So I want to play it for you. It's about 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Watch with us. And this has been really, really powerful and effective to show to other boys and men in presentations, in the trainings, in the workshops. So I want you to watch it too. And this is available for free access on the internet. You can use it at your leisure for things that you want to do. But Ken, if you want to start it, let's watch this together.
All right.
Today, we know that 1 in every 4 females will experience sexual victimization during their lifetime. However, most people still do not realize that 1 in every 6 males will also experience sexual victimization during their lifetime.
I was just a boy, and I just thought they loved me.
I couldn't find anyone to help me.
I didn't know any adult male could be raped.
Nobody ever asked me if anything was wrong.
I didn't know who to tell.
I couldn't find anyone to help me.
Often, it can be 20 years before many males are able to talk about their sexual victimization.
I thought I could fix it myself.
It was so long ago, I thought I could get over it.
Male survivors are often unseen and unheard. They face additional challenges of social attitude and stereotypes about men and toxic masculinity. Often survivors of sexual victimization are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder by well-intended professionals, but disorder can pathologize and blame the victim, implying a chronic and potentially unhealable condition. We need to reframe trauma. Survivors experienced something that was done to them, an act of unwanted violence that was perpetuated against them. Sexual violence survivors don't have a disorder. They have an injury, and injuries can heal. Post-traumatic stress injury is more accurate. It enables us to examine our normal physiological trauma reactions and responses in a better light. It recognizes there's nothing wrong with us, our actions, or thoughts. It's a critical tool for male survivors. We are all hardwired to have predictable biological responses to overwhelming life events. Our rational brain is our ability to reason through various options, plan, and create new thoughts. But when faced with a danger we don't have the tools or ability to handle, our amygdala, a central part of our emotional brain, is triggered by the thoughts and actions we do in our bodies. We have no time to think, so our body and primitive emotional brain blindly reacts in an attempt to protect us. Ideally, if the stressor ends, or we use our abilities to stop the danger, our body and rational brain resumes normal functioning, protecting our more vulnerable emotional brain and body from injury. But repeated or sustained danger or harm causes the body and emotional brain to fire again and again, leading us to an overreactive state. This causes chronic anxiety, fear, and stress response. Trauma is not the incident of harm or danger, it's the residual emotional and physical shrapnel that results. This emotional shrapnel affects the body as well as the mind. When the emotional brain in our body kicks into overdrive, other functions are slowed or shut down, causing physical and emotional harm. Trauma survivors are about 3 times more likely to deal with gastrointestinal issues, chronic pain, and fatigue syndromes. It has been found to contribute to type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and rheumatoid arthritis, to name a few. There is an increase in nearly every medical issue over time. Yet many men would not define their experience as trauma, despite being profoundly injured. Trauma affects our body and mind, but the body and mind can also work together in our physical and emotional healing. Now that we know more about the brain and body's reaction to trauma, let's look at some of the social issues male victims face. Because cultural awareness about sexual victimization has an implicit gender bias, females and children are seen as victims, while males are seen as perpetrators. Male survivors of sexual victimization seldom share their distress with friends or family. They learn to struggle within isolation. They use whatever coping responses they can figure out on their own. Avoidance, always on guard or hypervigilant, dangerous or risky behavior, and substance use, abuse, and dependence. When life is difficult, they tend to blame themselves or internalize shame for not being able to fix their own problems. Male survivors are seldom represented in the larger culture of abuse survivors. They are often unable to find healing resources, and when they do, they are faced with being diagnosed with a post-traumatic stress disorder. This leaves many men feeling that their only option is to fix their problem on their own. Reframing trauma from disorder to injury is not just a matter of words. Viewing trauma differently is a powerful tool for healing. It recognizes the emotional and physical shrapnel of how trauma affects who we are and how we live. By recognizing this and using the mind to help heal the body and the body to help heal the mind, we can heal our whole self. These tools offer freedom from the prison of fear and shame. They offer hope that things will get better. MenHealing is here to help you get beyond survival and gain skills for healing.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to share the PowerPoint again. Was there anything coming in the chat? Jim, Sharon, anyone?
We did get a wow.
Oh,
So
wow.
somebody really liked that video. And great video, thank you. That's what we're getting in the chat. So I'll leave it up
Okay.
to you to debrief.
All right.
Oh, and someone's going to share it on Facebook. So that's awesome. Yes,
Thank
please
you.
share it far and wide. And the link, Louis, just put the link in the chat for you as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. So we invite you to share your responses to the video and this idea of post-traumatic stress injury as opposed to disorder. I've always loved this reframing in my work with clients because I feel like when you think about your body, you have a knee injury. If you don't do anything about the knee injury, it'll always linger. It may heal, but it's going to heal with like, something going on. I've had 5 knee surgeries, and I'm not as healed as I was when I was 22, 23 years old before I blew my knee out. But I can get by, but I can't do some of the things I used to do. So imagining, it's interesting. We take care of our bodies in this way, but we don't think the same way about our the things between the ears, our experiences between the ears. So I think that injury framing is really helpful. And let's see what's coming from. Yes, reframed, very illuminating. This is also powerful. I say all the time, I wish more men would use our services. Absolutely. Let's see what else is coming in here. Uh, there we go. All right. Yes, please share with your coworkers, everything. We want to get this out because part of the work here at MenHealing is not just offering our weekends and our various services. We want to build out a movement of folks who are lifting up the voices of male survivors also. So, all right, how might this impact your approach to helping survivors heal from sexual harm? Like that disorder model versus injury. And Jim's going to talk a little more about this in a little bit, but how might this impact your approach? And if you can, put it in the chat. I'd love to hear it. David, many of my clients have said they don't like to talk about the disorder. Yeah. So having that, calling it an injury, you said many don't like to talk about their disorder, right? It's almost like it cuts the conversation off. There's no opportunity to there's not the possibility of healing, it seems, when you use the term disorder. All right. Injuries was disorder is powering. What advocacy needs to happen with DSM to make this reframe official? I mean, I think it takes time, right? I feel like we're making progress with the DSM, right? We're not there yet, but I think there is progress being made. You look at the DSM-4 versus DSM-5. There have been some change. They got rid of the different axes of diagnoses. And there's a number of other things that are happening. So hopefully this continues. Let's see, more reflection questions. So we invite
Sorry, Ken, I want to jump in. I
go
know
ahead.
you're going back and forth, and I was looking at the chat, and I just think someone put it really clearly that being victimized is not a disorder.
Exactly. Right. The thing that was done to you is not your disorder. Right. So also thank you for that, Sharon, because I'm missing some of those things in the chat. But think about any boy or male survivor of sexual harm with whom you're familiar with and share feedback on how do you think this frame would impact them or their journey to heal. I think about some of the folks, the young men I've worked with over the years, they really struggled with the term being a victim. I wasn't a victim, Ken. And I'm like, why were you not a victim? This thing happened to you. It was done to you. And the same thing, that same instinct of, well, I'm a man, so I shouldn't have this thing happen to me. I can't be weak. It can't be all these other things. So it was interesting that even there's a possibility of like, well, you got harmed. Whatever it is to open up that conversation, right? Little boys should be told the same cautions that little girls are raised with. Yeah, I feel like I always say universal precautions. Let me see. I'm still looking at these chats. There's a lot of stuff coming in the chat, Sharon and Jim. Let's see. Had to start with the
Well, it
kids.
talks a lot about teaching reframing to kids,
Yeah.
right? And it goes back to what you just said about, that's what we're getting a lot in the chat.
Mhm.
And that again, it's universal precautions, that gender inclusive language,
Yep.
and having those same conversations with everyone, including
Yeah.
boys and men.
Yeah.
It's a
And then
great way
Sharon,
of prevention.
yeah, it is. And it's interesting. Like when you think of how we're socialized, right? A little boy is learning how to walk, they fall, and they're about to cry. And the first thing typically many folks will say, boy, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. It's okay, don't cry. So your messaging is that emotion, I should not have access to it. And if I do show it, people around me are either going to be uncomfortable or make it be very clear that that's not accessible to me. So, and I feel if it starts at that point, what that makes sense when you see someone who's been in this kind of system of male socialization, um, having struggles with this, not being taken 20 years to disclose and 30 years to talk about it, right? So, yeah, I think on that
And the
note,
reframe is coming through, Kenton, about the idea that we're all human.
exactly, exactly. There shouldn't be a hierarchy about harm. Harm is harm. All right, so Jim, this is to you, buddy.
The overall takeaway from what we're attempting to communicate is the reframe will hopefully be empowering for people. Currently, the progress was that we began to apply post-traumatic stress disorder to survivors of sexual harm, not just for military. That was an advancement. However, that paradigm at its core, using everything based on disorder, communicates hopelessness, and it's victim blaming. Again, rather than what happened to you, what's wrong with you. And it communicates, I'll never recover from this. This disorder seems so permanent. So I think the underlying message to consider is how our current diagnostic approach pathologizes victimization. And if you can consider that possibility, then what it does is the ripple effect, it opens the door for you to consider, while we're waiting to figure out if the DSM can ever change and incorporate this proposed change, we may not be able to change how we do our record keeping, the requirements. We may not be able to change how we have to file for third-party reimbursement, but what we can change is our approach to what we do when we interact in the relationships between ourselves and the survivors that we're healing. So what I invite you to consider is the challenge to take away, let's do a reframe down the whole structure of the ways in which survivors may be diagnosed, because a lot of survivors come in and they may get multiple or varied diagnoses. So what if we, again, reframe to traumatic stress injury? What if we reframe borderline personality structure? What if we do dissociative spectrum? What if we shift to anxiety coping responses? And what about if we begin to deal with attention hyperactivity dysregulation? Those are things we can implement now while we're waiting for any changes to happen in the professional approaches with how we interact from the first time we meet to whatever journey we're on, is we take that into the clinical presence and our relationship working. Our experience is that changes the journey completely. And that changes the dynamics of the relationship completely. We can still use trauma-informed and evidence-based approaches, but we can add this additional feature. Next slide. And then what we need to consider is that for a lot of people, survivors present in very different ways. Many male boys and men are going to express differently. And therefore, you may have multiple kind of diagnostic presentations that come. And so any of those reframes will be helpful. In addition, when people have chronic, long-term, early victimization, before we really have our resources in place, we have the harms that might be viewed better through the lens of complex trauma, which what that means, complex trauma, is the multiplicity of presentations, but rather than landing on one of those kind of naming blaming presentations, consider complex trauma. Judith Herman, who Sharon mentioned previously, a clinician proposed way back in 1988 that there be a diagnostic consideration that factors in that issue of complex trauma, that brings together the multiplicity of things that we have to be considering at the same time. And the value of the complex trauma is that it really acknowledges disturbances to individual self-organization that happen kind of in three different levels. The way in which so often survivors of sexual harm struggle with affective or emotional dysregulation, struggle with negative self-concept, and really have relational difficulties. All those things are so clear, but if we pocket in just one of those categories, we're going to miss the dynamics of the interplay that happens between them all. So therefore, it's important that we consider not only the post-traumatic stress injury, but the complexity of trauma through the lens of complex trauma. And one of the ones that's so historic that will be there is how many times survivors are misdiagnosed as borderline personality. And yes, it's true that a lot of survivors have that comorbid presentation, but that may be a behavioral response. It may be a survivalist response. It is not necessarily an inherent personality trait, but we've been treating it within that framework of borderline personality disorder and the dreaded diagnosis a lot of times that we just don't want to land in our laps.
Yeah.
Back up and consider that it's a feature of response to sexual harm. We are, in terms of the questions asked before, there isn't progress yet to get into the DSM. However, there has been progress in 2018 in getting a change of post-traumatic stress into the clinical diagnostic manual, the ICD-11.
Yeah.
However, it's still framed as disorder. So complex trauma is now in the ICD-11, but it's still complex trauma disorder. So we need to do one more level, and that's remove the disorder in all of our clinical thinking so that we can then, our record keeping, our filing, and all of our approaches will maybe take a dramatic change with those kinds of reframes.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add, like, if you remove the disorder, it opens up the possibilities of healing once again, right? Especially for us as practitioners. So just some additional considerations, right? Systemic and institutionalized trauma. I think about we have to hold this lens that survivors, male survivors, all survivors, for the most part, are experiencing their harm within the foundation of white supremacy culture. And this is why I'm saying it. I know it's one of the questions. So imagine I am I'm a Black man and I'm a survivor. I may be hesitant to attend a support group because maybe it's not, maybe it's the only thing available, only service available for me. And it took me a long time to get up the nerve to acknowledge my survivorship. I go into a space that may not fully speak to me, and I might be a little hesitant to share, to process, while I'm also getting a message that I'm lesser than because of where I land in this space of my survivorship. So it's really important to think about how sexual harm intersects with social and cultural oppression, and that's why I brought it up earlier. I see that was one of the questions in Q&A. And then also importance of understanding the strength and resilience of our survivors. Our folks, this thing was done to them, this horrible thing was done to them, but they can be okay with the work that they're going to do, to Sharon's original reframing from Broken. And I do appreciate this notion of post-traumatic growth, that we can grow from it. It's not that it gets better, it gets different. And it's a new way of moving around the world. So I'm gonna pass it off to you, Sharon, right?
Yes, I do want to acknowledge something. I know we'll do Q&A in a moment, but something that's in the chat. We addressed it last week, but I think it's important to address it again. Someone had asked about hearing the myths about sexual harm impacting sexual orientation for men and boys. And as I think Jim, I don't remember now who talked about it, but those are definitely, I think it was actually Kenton, those are actually questions that come up for survivors. particularly men survivors. I would say all survivors, but we're talking about men today,
Yeah.
around their orientation. I will tell you that sexual violence or sexual harm does not impact orientation. I'm going to give you a bit of a reframe, and I think it's important for you to think about how to use it for yourself and how to teach it to survivors. But I think the importance is that sexual harm is using sex acts to control and cause harm. It is actually not about desire. And if you break it down and think about, as Kenton mentioned earlier, white supremacy culture and the patriarchal society that we live in, is very often men and boys have more power. So if someone wants to gain more power, they're going to abuse someone who has more power, men and boys, and then use the conditioning that men and boys can't experience sexual harm to get away with it. So I think it's just really important. The reframe is that sexual harm is about control and harm. It is not about desire. So therefore, it does not actually impact sexual orientation. However, it does cause men survivors to wonder and question. And so it is about having that conversation about really understanding what was done to them and how it impacts them. And again, recognizing that sexual harm is about power and control. So I hope that was helpful, and we can definitely address it more if it wasn't. Before we move into the Q&A, it's always really important to stop and think about what you're taking away from this session. We've talked a lot about definitions of things to use and using sexual harm. We've talked about reframing, again, which is my favorite. You watched an amazing video, which had some great reviews. We talked about common reactions and messages that men will experience as a result of sexual harm. And I'm just wondering from all of you, if you would take a moment and really ask yourself, what am I taking away from today's presentation? And if you're willing to share that in the chat, it will help reinforce what you've learned and help us to integrate it more into our learning. So I'll give a few moments for folks to, again, answer the question. What are you taking away from today's presentation? Reframing of disorder to injury. I would say reframing PTSD to PTSI.
Yeah.
Yep. And I just want to really think about, not only is it important for us to reframe these things for ourselves and how we see and work with our clients. If we see them as injured versus disorders, it changes how we work with them. And again, it's all about teaching them these concepts as well and what it means to them. Yes, thank you. Language is hugely powerful. Absolutely. Absolutely true. Language. How sexual misconduct and sexual assault affects all human beings and the commonality of male survivors. Reframing in many contexts. And reframing sexual harm is done to a person, and using happen can make it seem like an accident. So thank you very much. Broken is really means you'll be okay. Exactly, broken and okay. I love that. Ken, if you don't mind the next slide, as you continue to place things, what we hope you're taking away is many things, but that reframing trauma supports building blocks for hope and healing. And remember to tap into the resilience and growth of the survivors that we're looking at. Another thing we tend to do as providers in some ways is to infantilize survivors of sexual harm. And so it's really important for us to reframe the fact that they're coming to us with a lot of resilience. They've gotten to where they are right now and growth, and to acknowledge that and utilize that in our work with them. So I'm going to stop talking now. Please continue to read the chat and some of the takeaways for folks. And I just want to bring folks' attention to the websites that are available to you on the slides, and to please visit those websites for our many organizations, and also our references and resources are also available to you with the slides. And again, feel free to share that video.
Let me add one thing, Sharon. There's one question about what should you do in terms of approaching boys or men who you suspect may have had sexual harm, but they've not made a disclosure. One of the things you can do at the MenHealing website is we have a large library of videos of men telling the stories of their sexual harm and their recovery. I think if you can find some way to communicate to that kind of a client, they may want to check out some of the videos, because what we're finding is that when boys or men see themselves in someone's story, they may more likely be able to have the safety, safe enough to share something. Oh, that's kind of my story too. The statistics don't do that. The statistics don't break through that. And then the second part is to always ask boys and men questions about what happened to you, what's the behavioral thing. If you say, were you abused, were you raped, were you assaulted, so often men or boys won't have that framework to say that. But if you ask them, tell me the narrative of what happened, they will tell you the story that's clear that it is in that category. That bridges sometimes the conversation in a different way than the umbrella words.
So I'm going to stop sharing the screen, y'all, so I can see everybody's faces.
We'll take Q&A if people have questions you'd like to ask us anymore.
All right. Yeah, there's one here. There's two here. Let's see. Do y'all have any advice for how to work with someone on their hypermasculinity and aggression as trauma responses? I feel like, I think in my experience, I don't react to it because I think that reaction is to get that response is to get a reaction that is similar, that's like socially accepted. Like, okay, if I act out, you're going to act out to me. So then it's a rejection. So then we don't have to do the real work, right? As a defense mechanism. So I usually I stay and I don't react to it. I try not to react to it, even though, because it's not easy, because once again, it's reframing. And I almost look at this reframing as we're all used to using our right hand to write. Now I'm trying to learn how to do this with my left hand.
I think the way I would respond to that, my experience, because I worked with lots and lots of men who spend just hours in the gym or work really hard to get themselves as buffed up as possible, as many tattoos as possible. And what I always try to do in that case is connect with the experience. Because if you have had an experience where you lost control was taken away, your control didn't make a difference to stop the outcome, it's really easy to get caught on the path of, if I make myself stronger, I can't be hurt again. If I make myself very tough, people will be afraid and no one will mess with me again. And just by connecting with the reality of that experience, what it usually leads to is some conversation about how, have you realized that one of the unintended consequences are you have a soft part of you and it's not showing, and do you really intend to have people be afraid of you, or is it merely that you're trying to protect yourself and be in control? And how can we blend what you're doing with that experience of being strong and tough with not losing that part of you that's soft and cuddly? And it's kind of a generalization, but I can't tell you how many times I worked with the tough guy and find out that underneath it's a teddy bear. And how do I help them make it safe enough that they don't have to deny themselves that part of themselves being in the world, and how they can blend them together. And that's therapeutically, clinically, recovery-wise, can be a really huge reframe. But I don't want to get into a power struggle about it's good or bad that you're this tough, that you're this big, that you're this strong. Let's blend them and make that an asset that you can use in your favor.
I think all the tools we've talked about lead to this. And I'm going to speak as a moment as a woman who works with men, and sort of how we are all socialized. For men, anger is an acceptable emotion. For women, it is not. For women, sadness is an acceptable emotion. For men, it's not. And I think anger is an emotion in itself. And as we know, it's also an emotion that covers other emotions. So if we give the space for anger, it'll open up to what it also is behind it. So there's that anger and what's behind it. So being able to accept it, I think is important. As Kenton said, I can't tell you enough how we have to, I train clinicians, and anger is the thing that they fear the most. Yeah. And again, it's teaching clinicians that anger doesn't equal violence. And how do we get comfortable enough to sit with anger? Not abuse, we're not to be abused, there's to be no violence, but how do we sit with anger? And I think a large part of our inability to accept other folks is because we can't sit with it ourselves. So figuring out what you need to do, because you need to provide that space. Very often, as Ken said, folks will use anger as a way to deflect or keep it off of them, and they expect to be attacked. Now imagine if you reframed everything, they showed you anger and you didn't attack them. How amazing that would feel.
You know, the reframe, Sharon, as we're talking, outrage is appropriate. Outrage is appropriate. And that's an aspect of anger. To reframe anger as outrage, but it's not maybe helpful to give up that part of yourself to do it. And the other reframe is that, which I see works so often in working with males, is that vulnerability and softness are a strength, not a weakness. But I think the stereotype is you come in, if you're vulnerable as a male, you're being weak. And to really realize how many people really resonate when you offer the possibility that it takes a lot of strength to be vulnerable.
And then when you think about this from a lens of systemic oppression and everything, that anger is an acknowledgement of the power differential between us as service providers and advocates and the person that's coming through the door for services and support. So I think it's really important for us to not respond to the anger in a way that like is prescriptive, to everyone's point, to Sharon's point of what possibilities will that open up. And I think it's really about us kind of remaining, and we talk about this a lot at MenHealing on our weekends with our survivors. We talk about your observer self and being centered and just like, okay, tell me more. That's interesting you did that. Tell me more. As opposed to, oh, I've seen this before. So I know the 5, 6, I know the next step and the next step and the next step. So trying to maintain your own radical curiosity as an advocate or a service provider, I think is really important.
You know, a great book for those of you who aren't already aware of this. Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Barry a couple of years ago wrote a book, What Happened to You? Talks about the dynamic we're doing here. And she references the example in there. You're in the classroom and the young male throws the chair across the room or punches somebody. And the first instinct is to go over and put them in detention or give them some kind of penalty. Whereas what if we walked over and said, what happened to you? Tell me what's going on. But we so quickly do the punitive approach instead of finding out what's below the anger. And a lot of times there's a big story that might be able to be revealed, narrative, if we just engage without reacting to the violence.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch gears. We do have another question, and it's a long one, but I'm going to try and sort of make it smaller, but also make it more general at the same time. I think what's being addressed and asked about is, why are the perpetrators' self-gratification needs more important than survivors? Which gets to the idea of usually it's by someone that you know. And so we're talking about the feeling of betrayal and how that is important to address, particularly when you are harmed by somebody that you know, that feeling of betrayal, which very often happens in military sexual trauma, incest situations, that feeling of betrayal. And then how do you talk about that? And then how do you help people to address it or understand when somebody is in a relationship with them and they're authentic in their wants and their needs and trying to be with that person versus not being able to trust anybody? Hope that made sense.
You know, another way, Sharon, that may add to that is if you look at the dynamics between offender and victim, more often than not, the offender is in a one-up position. Somehow they're more, whatever it is, they're one up in some way. And the victim may be one down. Teacher, student, commanding officer, line staff, parent, child. So I think that's offenders play to their one-upmanship. And that's one of the things we need to deconstruct or kind of figure out as we're working with people, but offenders use that to their advantage to grab the attention.
So you want to talk about power dynamics, you want to talk about grooming, you do want to talk about that betrayal and what that means for that person. And how do they understand it moving into future relationships, and what could that look like?
Yeah, another question in here, y'all. What do you advise male survivors who avoid receiving counseling but want to participate in only peer support groups? Then they try to use peer leaders as a substitute for their therapists. And Louis, looks like Louis is going to answer this one.
Okay.
At least that's popped up in the question.
Oh, I was just marking it as being answered live.
Sorry. Figuring out. I was like, okay, Louis, go ahead. But nah, Sharon, Jim, I know we're running support groups now in MenHealing. So Jim, I'd love to hear what do you think.
Well, I think that's a lot of our approach is we are trying to be, again, relational in our approach to working with survivors. But I think a lot of people, the system feels dangerous. Entering into the system feels like I'm going to be pathologized, I'm going to be disordered, I'm going to be labeled. Why would I ever walk into a system that if I'm honest and open, I'm going to get a diagnosis, and then that's going to go on my record, and then that's going to affect everything about my life? And that the approaches that are so often used in the formalized clinical settings have that power differential built into them. Or some of the approaches are developed from approaches that aren't culturally sensitive. And so therefore, I think that question speaks to the fact that so many people, their sniffer is smart enough to know that why do I want to go into a situation that, again, I might be betrayed or harmed? If I'm with a peer, it's going to be safer. And being with a peer who has some leadership but isn't an authority is going to be safe enough, as opposed to, I think that's where we have to really work on our agencies, our offices, our organizations. How do we make ourselves accessible and not built on power, and not built on authority, and not built on the rightness of our knowledge, to engage people in this kind of softer approaches? That's particularly important, I think, for a lot of the boys and men who don't want to walk in and get caught up in that perceived system. That's that's the lens I see it through.
I think there's an and too, as someone who does run groups as a clinician, is that if someone doesn't have their individual therapist, they also want to use the clinician as an individual therapist. So this is something that is universal, I imagine, across many groups. And I do know a lot of folks out there are trying to run groups, and I know folks reached out to me about it. So I think it's important to address it. Sexual violence or sexual harm is also something that impacts boundaries, is a violation of boundaries. It is also really important to have boundaries and be transparent about those boundaries. So for any leader, peer leader, or any clinician is, by the way, to use supervision, but to talk about the boundaries of the relationships within the group, and the boundaries of the leaders, and what they're there to do. They're there to facilitate, not to lead, right? And I think it's being really honest about and transparent about what your role is. And then not only setting those boundaries, but following up with those boundaries. Again, for folks who've had their boundaries crossed, it's really important, therapeutic and reparative, to have conversations about boundaries, what they are. Like Jim said, they're flexible, they're accessible, but being understanding about that, because it's also important for the peer leaders and the professionals to also set those boundaries and to follow up with them. And that hopefully, again, teaches boundaries, because it's important. I had a survivor once say to me, I wasn't taught boundaries, so therefore I didn't realize you had them either. And so it is important to have that and talk about that as a lesson. And then maybe if there are boundaries around that, the person might then want to seek more services, and then you can help facilitate that. If they're not getting their needs met here because they can't, because there are boundaries to these groups, then maybe there are other places, and it may not be therapy, it just may be other places. And it's great to spread out resources community-wide and get people as many resources as they can have.
You know, the other thing to consider is if we broaden our lens, I think we need to find whatever way feels safe enough for someone to start their journey of healing, and maybe consider how often somebody going to a peer group might be a safe step than going to a professional or to an agency, and consider that that may set the context for someone being able to go further. But if we see it through the lens of entry point instead of avoidance.
So it doesn't look like there's any more questions in the Q&A. So
Appreciate everyone filling out the evaluation, giving us your feedback. That's helpful. And I think all of us are available if you contact our agency, if you have follow-up questions, requests, BARC, MenHealing, NSVRC, our websites are all one of the slides considered here. Just please send us your feedback about our work, questions, invitations, ways we may be all, I think both BARC and MenHealing are wanting to be collaborative with community-based agencies and with other providers.
Sharon, Ken, Jim, thank you so much for another great session. Thank you to everyone who attended for participating in the Q&A and in the chat prompts. Really loved seeing what you all were thinking and what you had to ask and share with our presenters. Want to thank our whole team. Thanks to Cortland and Hallie for recording today. And yes, I saw a couple questions. Those videos will be posted. Thanks to Amber and Jamie for providing live ASL interpretation, for Tamara and Erica for providing live Spanish interpretation, to Kara for doing the captioning for us. So it's a big team effort to do these, and we appreciate everyone's support. Yeah, we will definitely be checking out what you have to say in the evaluations. So please do continue to fill those out every time. And we look forward to being back with you all next month. In the meantime, just like I said at the top, you can tell colleagues who maybe weren't able to attend that they can still catch up and check out those recordings. They can still register and join the rest of the series. And yeah, Kenton, Sharon, Jim, any final words before we say goodbye?
Enjoy the weather and the rest of the day.
Indeed. Thanks,
Thank you to
everyone.
everyone.
Have a great day. Take care.